Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Billi FitzSimons.
I'm Sam Koslowski.
Did you know that some politicians still get paid an annual salary, or in this case a pension, upon retiring from Parliament?
No.
You didn't?
I didn't.
Well, this podcast is for you then. Now, the scheme no longer exists, but politicians who were in Parliament prior to it being axed in 2004 are still eligible. And the reason we are talking about it now is because Peter Dutton, who just lost his seat of Dickson and so will be removed from Parliament after 24 years, is one of the eligible politicians. We thought it was the perfect time to explore this little-known scheme that will see millions of dollars being paid out to former politicians for decades to come.
The first thing I think of when you start talking about this is those ads for the lottery, which say you're going to get paid $25,000 every year for the rest of your life.
I haven't seen those ads.
Oh, well, you should watch more kind of daytime commercial television.
Yes.
But it's this amazing idea that they could just be getting this salary forever.
Yes.
Where did this all come from?
Okay, so this story starts in 1948, and that is the year that something called the Parliamentary Contributory, which is a tongue twister, Superannuation Scheme, or we'll call it PCSS, was created. And this was a scheme that mandated, so it became by law required, that politicians who had completed 12 years of service in Parliament be paid a certain amount each year once they leave Parliament.
So I guess then kind of a milestone for politicians to work towards, and then they're kind of set for life.
Yeah. And the amount owed is dependent on how long they were in Parliament for, and also if they held any senior roles, such as being a minister. Another interesting thing about it is that how much you are owed is dependent on what the current salary of an MP is.
Interesting.
So if you were in Parliament in the 1980s, for example, obviously the salary that you got then is not the salary that MPs today get.
Sure.
But what you're being paid is dependent on what MPs today get paid.
Right.
And like I said, it's dependent on how long you were there for. So if you were in Parliament for, say, 15 years, you got more money than someone who was in Parliament for 12 years. And if you were a Minister for Education, let's say, then you got more than someone who was a backbencher.
And is the reason all of this came into existence the same way that employers think about like long service leave or something?
Yeah, kinda. It was, well, in 1948, how superannuation existed then is nothing like how it existed today.
Right.
And so that was one of the primary reasons that this existed. And it was kind of seen as a way to entice people to get into politics, because a lot of people would be leaving the private sector where they may have been owed something like long service leave, like you said.
Yeah.
And so this was a way to entice people to get into politics.
Okay.
Another reason is that it was seen as harder for a politician to re-establish their career once their parliamentary term was over.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
So you had a situation where they established this scheme because people were leaving private jobs to enter politics and then perhaps struggling to get jobs after being in politics. How weird that today...
I was going to say...
It's kind of the opposite.
Yeah, it's not really the case that it's harder to find a job after politics. I don't think
probably
now.
say it's easier.
Yeah.
Like we see a lot of politicians move into the private sector, sitting on boards and becoming parliamentary advisors or strategy advisors for private companies and earning a lot more than they did in Parliament.
Yes, exactly. But I think the big reason for this scheme existing was because it was a form of superannuation and it was a way to pay people after they retired, which when this was created, I mean, superannuation wasn't even mandatory in Australia until 1992.
Right.
So you have to remember this was not created now.
Yeah.
This was created at a certain period in time when things were very different.
And you mentioned before that it ended in 2004.
Yes.
What were the reasons that they wound this program up?
Yeah, so it was abolished in 2004 by then Prime Minister John Howard. It was actually an idea brought forward by Mark Latham, who at the time was the opposition leader and the leader of the Labor Party. Now, the Labor Party and the coalition were gearing up for an election at the time. Mark Latham brought this idea forward, and John Howard responded by saying, I don't necessarily agree with this position, but I don't want this to become a partisan debate. So we're just going to abolish it. And he recognized that it was seen as too generous by community standards. I actually found a clip of John Howard announcing that it was going to be abolished, which I thought I would play.
There is a community perception that this super is too generous. I think the overall package is not too generous, but people think the soup is generous. And rather than this thing drift on for months as the subject of a partisan political debate, I've decided to act immediately to get it off the agenda as a partisan political issue.
So yeah, like I said, he's saying, I don't really want this to become the subject of months-long debate, so I'm just going to act on it immediately. Now, although it was dismantled, the scheme is still applicable to anyone who entered Parliament before the 2004 federal election. For anyone who was elected after that date, there is a different scheme that exists, and it's just more in line with how superannuation works for everyone today.
So I guess if you entered Parliament before that 2004 cutoff date, you essentially kind of signed terms and conditions that still need to be applicable for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I guess it must have been part of their contract that they signed at the time.
Well, there'll be quite a few of them because we have quite a few long-serving members of Parliament. Who are the politicians who would still be eligible for this?
I thought I would turn this back on you.
Oh, God.
Who do you think would still be eligible for this? Or how many politicians that are in Parliament today do you think were in Parliament prior to 2004?
Hi, I'm Zara. I'm the co-founder of the Daily Aus, and we started this company because we think news can be done differently. If you agree, you can hit subscribe. It's the best way to help us grow. Now, back to the video.
Okay, so we've got 150 in the lower house, and how many senators are there?
About 70, I think.
Okay, so let's call it 220. I'm going to say that there was 25% of them.
Wow.
Is that right?
No.
Oh.
No, much smaller than that.
Okay.
So
it just feels like an old institution right now, Australian politics. But
totally fair. No, so there are actually only 6 remaining.
Oh my God.
After the election that we just had, there are now only 6 that are still in Parliament and were there prior to 2004. Can you name any of them?
Current members?
Yes.
Albanese?
Yes, tick. Came in 1996. How's this audio experience for the listeners?
Oh my God, this is really challenging.
Should I go through them?
It's like, because I'm thinking like of the oldest people I can possibly imagine in Parliament.
I mean, honestly, the ones, they're not that old. They must have just gone into Parliament when they were relatively
in the early
young.
2000s.
Yes.
Barnaby Joyce?
No.
God.
Let me tell you some of them. Tanya Plibersek.
Wow.
She was first elected in 1998, around the same time as Anthony Albanese. Catherine King, who is a Labor MP. I don't think she's as well known as the other ones, but she was first elected in 2001.
Yep.
Penny Wong, who I'm sure you'll be familiar with.
Yep.
She was first elected in 2002.
I approached this problem the wrong way, but yeah.
Yes. Susan Lee, and also
vying for the leadership of the Liberal Party.
Yes. And how could you forget Bob Katter? First elected 1993.
Right. So you've got that group of 6, which is actually a much more diverse, but also quite a powerful group of 6 than I would have thought.
Yes. They have been in their job for a long time.
Yeah.
They've been in Parliament for a long time.
So they will continue to get that benefit
once they retire, but obviously none of them have retired yet.
Cool.
But why we're talking about it today, or why it's come up in the news recently, is because Peter Dutton has obviously just retired from Parliament and he is now eligible for this. Now, the equation to work out exactly how much he will get is complex. Like literally the most complex. I think I sat at my desk for an hour just trying to figure this out. It's true. I don't know if you know this about me, Sam, but I did extension maths.
You have mentioned that a couple of times.
So I pride myself on being able to do maths. It's dependent on how many roles for how many years. Like sometimes it comes down to how many days you were in a certain position for.
Right, my gosh.
And that all comes into how much you get once you retire. But news publication Crikey had much more stamina than me, and they did do the maths. And they estimated it to be about $258,000 a year, which sounds about right based on the numbers that I saw in the reports about
nice one,
how this all
Einstein.
works.
Yeah.
So that means, just to reiterate, that Peter Dutton will get $258,000 a year every single year for the rest of his life.
And I wonder if he's allowed to also earn income through other means.
Of course,
So it's not exclusively you have to earn it. So you could safely assume that he'll re-enter the private sector, most likely sit on some boards, do some speaking events.
Yeah.
Do some advisory work, write a book. There's so many different ways that politicians can make money after their career in Canberra wraps up.
Yes.
That you could conceive that 250 will turn into 500 grand pretty quick.
you're talking about cumulatively with whatever other endeavours he
exactly
takes on.
Yeah, it's a nice kind of safety net to have until you die.
I mean, that's a very high income.
Yeah.
It is on the higher end of the amount available, and it's because he was in Parliament for so long, so 24 years like I mentioned, and he also held several ministerial roles when the coalition was in government. So that's why it definitely is on the higher end.
And so if we zoom out and we think about those 6 current members, but also then everyone alive who was in politics before 2004, how much is this program actually costing us, the Australian taxpayer?
So the Department of Finance ran the numbers in a report it released in 2023. It found that there are more than 400 retired politicians and their spouses who are still being paid this annual payment. In terms of how much it is costing us, in the current financial year, so 2024-2025, the government will spend about $48 million on this scheme, and that's this year alone. Now, what I found interesting is that they expect that these payments will still be being paid up until at least 2063.
Isn't it remarkable? I mean, that makes sense. I mean, we're thinking then about 40 years down the line. Yeah, you kind of start
doing the maths on people's life expectancy.
Of doomsday maths.
It goes a bit dark very quickly.
But isn't it fascinating that a reform that was wrapped up formally in 2004 will actually come out of play 60 years later?
So interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that we don't hear a lot about because it did wrap up 20 years ago. But it's just interesting how a policy, like you said, that, first started, what is the maths, nearly 90 years ago, 80 years ago, it will continue to cost taxpayers millions of dollars for decades after it ended.
Can I ask you a question to wrap up, Billi? What's your personal opinion on whether politicians should be paid after, whether it's this program or another program? Do you think politicians should be entitled to payments after they leave politics?
Wow, putting me on the spot, especially when we always say at TDA we don't do opinion.
Well, this would be a non-partisan opinion, applying to everyone on all sides of politics.
That's true. I think that what they have now, which is just a superannuation scheme that's in line with what everyone else gets, makes sense. But I don't think that...
But you don't get a superannuation payment for the rest of your life if you work in public health.
No, but you get money put aside that you then have access to for the rest of your life. And I think that, politicians should have that just as everyone else should have that. But I think a scheme like this, but like I said, it was, do you know that quote, you can't judge the past with the spirit of the present? I think.
That's lovely.
Have you never heard that?
That's nice,
It's one of my favorite quotes. And I think that, it made sense for the time when it was created, but it doesn't make sense today.
That is a really interesting way to start our Monday morning, Billi. Thank you.
Are you going to tell us your opinion?
Oh, okay. I think I need to understand a little bit more about how politicians earn money whilst they're in Parliament. So,
said like a true politician, Sam. I need to understand more.
Are they getting super?
Yes, they get super. Well,
so then why do they get extra super?
Well, so here they did do like salary sacrifice, but it was a much smaller percentage and a much smaller amount than what they are now entitled to in the years after they retire.
Right.
So it's not like how superannuation works today where you get a certain amount put aside and then you get access to that later. Yeah. They were putting a certain amount aside, but they get much more when they retire. Like a lot more is being spent out for them.
Wow, that's so interesting. I think my view is that it should be relevant to how much they're earning from other things. And I think that it should be a safety net that's 100% there if they can't enter the private sector. But if they're delivering big speeches and writing books and sitting on boards, maybe there should be some sort of way for that to kind of be toned down a little bit. But neither of us are in charge. And that's okay because we're here doing the pod.
Yes.
And we'll make a difference our own way and definitely not have as much money as politicians do for the rest of their lives. Thank you so much for joining us on this morning's pod. That was a really interesting chat. Thank you, Billi. And thank you for joining us wherever you're listening or watching us. We hope you have a really great week and get through some of the kind of, struggles of the early Monday morning itis. You can always check out our newsletter. We've got, Picture This Game. We've got stuff going on our Instagram. There's lots to check out to get a spring in your step. We'll be back again with the headlines in the afternoon. Until then, see you later.
Bye.